It's been said a lot of times that game designing is something that you either have a talent for or you teach yourself, but nobody teaches it. Now the situation seems to be gradually changing, and our next speaker, Casper van Est, one of the founders of DoubleDutch Games, is a person who actually teaches game designing. He's gonna tell us about how to do it correctly.
All right. So my name is Casper. I'm here to teach a bit about game design. This is me. I made a game called SpeedRunners. SpeedRunners is a 4-player competitive platformer that you can play locally and or online, multiplayer. And I also teach game design at the University of Applied Sciences at Amsterdam. We have a computer science department, and a subset of that department is game development. And in that game development department, I teach game design to first, second, third, and fourth year students. And the talk that I prepared today is a bit of a summary of the things that we teach at this university, and it's a bit of a introduction to a few basic game design concepts. So what I want to focus on most is how to make a fun game and what makes a game fun. And to start off, I have an example of a game that I think is not fun, to let you know what that's like. And that's this video right here. I'll try and show it. Here we go. There should be audio. Okay, so this is a game called I Wanna Be the Guy.
Let's go this way.
We'll
oh my God.
Let him talk.
Come on. Come on. Move it along.
Come on, internet.
Oh, fuck. God damn it. All right. Should have saw that coming. What the fuck? I'm gonna be here all fucking day. All right. Oh my God, no! He touched it! Holy fuck! What the hell? What the fuck do I do there? That's fucking impossible. It's fucking impossible. You can't even get over there. What the fuck? How the fuck did I just get up there? Holy shit. That whole fucking thing is just bullshit. You fucking dick. Fucking apples. Fucking apples. I spent 20 fucking minutes downstairs getting murdered by fucking spikes, and it really is fucking impossible. And now there's fucking apples crushing me, exploding my fucking corpse into 1,000 pieces like fucking hand grenades. Fuck, I'm getting fucked by it. I'm getting fucked by fruit. It's a fruit fucker. Hey, we're just fucking apples. We're just fucking apples. Ah, fucking crush your ass. Go. Go. Fuck. This is why I don't go outside. This is what happens. Fuck. All right,
we'll stop it at that. So yeah, to me, it's an example of what a bad game is. It's a lot of fun for you as an audience, but for the player, it seemed not to be all that fun. He was very frustrated and shouting very angrily. So what I want to talk about is, if this is not a fun game, what is a fun game, and how can you make a fun game? At the university where I teach, we use a lot of books and a lot of articles by well-known game designers, and two of them are Ralph Koster and Dan Cook. And the points that they make about fun is that actually learning is a lot of fun, and that's where the main fun comes from in games. And Dan Cook made a article. He wrote an article about something he called skill atoms, which I'm going to talk about a bit as well in this presentation, which can be used as the fundamental building blocks of game design, and is a very good place to start game designing. They're very useful for analysis, so you can analyze other games and see what they do well and how it really works. It helps you in the design process. You can design your game and you can design the challenges in your game using these skill atoms. And it helps you in testing. When you do play tests for your game, you can make directed questions, very quantitative questions about what you want to test and how you can find correct answers to that. So then the question is, what are skill atoms? This is basically a overview of what a skill atom consists of. It starts off with a player performing an action. An example, in Mario, you all know Super Mario, I assume, the player can press A to jump. Let's take that example. So the player starts by doing an action, which is pressing A. Then the game performs a simulation, which is the physics of the character jumping, maybe colliding with something, in either way moving the character and changing the state of the game. Then the game provides feedback to the player. It changes the graphic of the character to a jump animation. It changes the position of the character to a higher position in the level, and maybe gives some more feedback in audio or visual cues. The player then uses this feedback to deduct what happened and what he can do in this game, and he learns a new skill or a new tool in his tool set. Some of the information is useful, like good feedback. Some of the information might be not useful at that time. But either way, the player learns something that after he pressed the A button, the character moved up, some animation played, some sound played, and now the player knows that if he presses A, he can jump. So that's all captured in this screen over here. We can make it a bit smaller and just summarizes it in this. So a skill of jumping is performed by performing an action, pressing a button. Some simulation is performed where the character jumps and maybe collides with something, physics, animations, and this is all fed back to the player using visual and audio feedback. And that way the player learns a new skill, this one called I Can Jump. So what you can do then is you can stack these skills on top of each other and allow the player to learn even more about your game. So when the player at some point has learned that he can jump, he can then try jumping near a platform. This will make the character collide with the platform. Maybe the player will stand on top of the platform. This is given back in visual feedback. And the player now knows, hey, I can jump on top of these platforms, and this way I can reach higher altitudes. And this is something, these skills are practice, so it's not something that he does one time and then he instantly knows everything about jumping and jumping on platforms, but this is something that the player repeats over and over until he's mastered this skill of, in this case, jumping or jumping on a platform. So what you can do then is, after you've combined all these skills into, after you stacked these skills on top of each other, you can create a whole tree of skills that the player can learn during playing of the game. So this is an example of a skill tree that Dan Cook has made for the game Tetris. It's a bit unreadable from this distance. You can look it up on his website later if you're interested. But what happens here, this is a skill tree that explains all the things that the player can do in the game Tetris, and how he can learn these things, and what he needs to know before he can learn new things. And what's interesting about such a tree is that it can either be wide or it can be very deep. If you make a very wide tree, then that means there's a lot of skills in your game, a lot of things that the player can learn, maybe a lot of mechanics, but these skills don't stack on each other. So whenever a player learns a certain skill, he doesn't use that skill to learn new skills. However, if you make a tree that's very deep, the player can learn skills and then use that skill to learn even more skills. And that's a lot of fun to do in a game. So let's look at some examples of interesting games that teach players skills using level design, which is, in my opinion, the best way to teach a skill to a player. So this is a well-known game, Super Mario, the original one. This is the first screen that the player encounters when he's playing the game. And keep in mind that when people started playing Mario, when this came out in 1985, they hadn't played many games before. They certainly hadn't played platforms before, so they didn't really know what this game was about and what you were supposed to do. So everything that we all now know about games and platforms was something very unheard of for them. So they had to be taught everything. Now in this first screen, there's already a couple of things that the game teaches the player using visual cues. So for instance, you can notice that the player starts off on the left side of the screen, and there's a huge white space on the right side, which indicates to the player like, hey, this is an interesting area, maybe you should go explore to the right. So that tells the player, okay, the thing in this game is about going to the right. That's basically all you do in Mario, go to the right. And also what it does is it shows the player that there's a difference between platforms that you can stand on and platforms that you don't stand on. Because the player starts off in front of this hill, which tells the player, okay, you can stand on this ground, but this hill is not part of the world in this game, it's just decorative. So that's the first thing that the player learns, and then he goes into this second screen, which is here on the right, where he encounters his first obstacle, the Goomba. So there's a lot of things that the game teaches the player in this area of the game. When the player encounters the Goomba is coming forward to him, and the player can be a bit scared because there's a creepy guy with an angry face coming towards him. So the player might freak out a little bit and start pushing some buttons. And one of the buttons that he can push is the A button, which is the jump button. And this, if he presses the button, like we saw in the skill earlier, if he presses the button, he gets some visual feedback on that the character is now jumping and making a sound. So he knows, okay, I can press this button and the character will jump. And then when the Goomba is really close, the player can jump, but he's probably not that skilled at jumping yet. So what he does is he jumps, but either he lands on top of the Goomba or he jumps over the Goomba. But either way, if he lands on top of the Goomba will die, and the player has learned a new skill, which is I can jump on enemies to get rid of them, or he can jump over the Goomba, by accident maybe, and he learns a skill that he can use this jumping ability to avoid getting hurt by enemies. And if he's really lucky, he might even accidentally bump his head on the question mark, which teaches the player another skill that you can bump against question marks and a coin will pop out and you will get rich. So then after the player has taken care of the Goomba and has surpassed this first obstacle, he comes into the second area where he's below this brick platform. The player has now only learned a few skills, mostly around jumping, so maybe he'll start jumping again. There's these question marks that are looking very tantalizing. So he jumps up. If he jumps against a brick wall, there's a little feedback animation that tells the player this is not really working for you, it doesn't do anything. But if he jumps against the question mark, the mushroom will pop out. The mushroom will go to the right, which is also a bit of an indicator to the player that the mushroom is a good thing, because Mario is going to the right, the Goomba was a bad thing, he was going to the left. So this thing that's going to the right must also be a good thing. Plus it's green while the Goomba was red. But this is not, like, a smart player can pick this up, but it's not really necessary for this game at the moment, because the mushroom goes to the right, but when he falls down and bumps into the pipe over there, it'll go to the left. And since the player was underneath the question mark when he triggered the mushroom, there's probably no way for the player to escape hitting that mushroom. Which is very interesting, because maybe the player is scared of the mushroom, but because he's in this tight space, he won't be able to ignore it. And there's a good chance he'll actually bump into the mushroom, making him Super Mario and growing in size. And if he then continues to jump, he will notice now that he can smash these brick platforms, creating new spaces for him to go through and new routes to go through the level. So that's a lot of things that the player already learns in this level, or in this section of the level. And then there's a final exam also baked into in this section in the form of the pipe. So the pipe is not only there to work as an obstacle for the mushroom, but also for the player, because the player has to jump over the pipe. And as a designer, from this point on, you know for certain that after the player has jumped over the pipe, he knows what jumping is and he knows how to use it, and you can give him more challenging obstacles that involve jumping. So that's a lot of things that the player already learns in this very short section of the map. He learned that the player is going right, that the goal of the game is to go right. He knows that he needs to push the A button to jump to get to the right, and he can use his jump skills to avoid or kill enemies. He can collect coins with his jump skill, he can make power-ups appear, he can smash bricks when he's big, and he can climb over obstacles with his jump power. And this is all things that happen in this very short first screen within like the first minutes of play, without giving the player a tutorial with a lot of text that says press A to jump, and if you do that you can do this and you can smash these enemies. There's no textual explanation. Everything that the player learned so far is learned via the medium of game, which is a lot of fun. So there's another interesting example in this first section of Mario, and it's a bit based on reward, because learning is fun because it has a reward, namely that you've learned a new skill. And there's no real reward in the sense of if you do something correctly you get 100 coins or something like that, but you get a pat on your shoulder from yourself. So this is a section that the player encounters a little bit later, and he first enters from the left, and he first sees this first jump section. And at this point the player is not all that confident about jumping yet, so what he does is probably when he enters this obstacle he'll fall down into the first pit, which tells the player like this is a difficult thing to do, jumping, you have to be very careful, but it's alright, this was a practice run, no worries, you can just jump out and continue on. But then the player encounters the second obstacle, and there the player will see, oh, this is more dangerous because there's no floor to help me when I mess it up. I fall to my death if I mess this up. So the player will be extra careful, but the player will probably not be aware that in the second jump there's actually an added tile that makes this jump a bit easier. So what happens is he'll be more careful and he will probably succeed at this second jump, making him feel super awesome about himself because it was a super difficult thing to do and he did it right. So that's a pretty cool way of rewarding the player using level design. So what we've looked at so far are really basic skills like jumping, and that may be a bit simple, but the level design can also teach a lot more complex skills to a player. This is an example from a game called Starguard. It's a very fun free little game. You can download it at this link. It's also a platformer where you can shoot. So you're the green guy and the red guys are enemies. And what happens here is these enemies, they go up and down, and every time they reach the ceiling or the floor, they shoot 2 bullets into each direction. So the checkpoint or the spawn point for the player is at the white flag over there. And what the player does in this area is he can stand on top of that platform there, and he has a very safe zone to look at the enemies, monitor their behavior, see what they're doing, and easily take them out without getting into harm's way. And this teaches the player that there's actually, for these type of enemies, there's a safe zone that you can stand in and that you can use to take out these enemies. And then a little bit later, the player encounters this section where it's a little bit, it's structured a little bit differently. So the player first takes out these other guys that he knows about already, but then when he reaches the up and down going guys, the player notices that he has to stand in this dangerous area before he can take them out, because the only way to take the first red guy out is to stand in his line of fire, which is difficult. But it's not that difficult, so it teaches the player how to deal with this type of situation where you have to stand in the line of fire, and that you can resolve it by jumping to dodge the enemy's bullet. And then when the player takes out the enemy, he creates a new safe zone for himself to relax a little bit and prepare for the next encounter. So this area also teaches the player a couple of new skills, namely that he can jump to avoid getting hit by this enemy, and that he has to take them out one by one to create safe zones. And then later on in the game there's a test or a final exam for the test to see what skills the player has learned, and that he can show that he's learned and mastered these skills. So this is a really complex area. There's enemies everywhere and there are a lot of dangerous places. All the red lines indicate danger zones. So there's, except from the place where he spawns, there's no real place for him to be safe. But the player has learned all these skills about how to take down these opponents. He knows what they do, and he knows how to take care of them, namely by taking care of them one by one, creating safe zones for himself. And that's the way he can go through this section, giving him all the tools to reach the end of this level. So, in summary, looking back at the I Wanna Be the Guy game, what made that game so bad, in my opinion, is that it's kind of fun. I mean, we had a lot of laughs looking at the video, but I guess it's a lot more fun to look at than it actually is to play, unless you're into that type of things. I don't know. But what you can see in I Wanna Be the Guy is that it doesn't really teach you all that much. There's a lot of hidden traps, and everything that you do or everything that you encounter is the exact opposite of what you would expect. So it not only teaches you nothing, but it forces you to unlearn everything that you've learned about that game and any game in general. In other words, the skill tree that you can make for this game is very wide. It has a lot of things that you can learn, because you have to learn about each and every single obstacle. But once you've learned how to overcome that obstacle, there's no depth to it. You've learned it and then you move on to the next one. There's no advantage in learning how to overcome an obstacle. And that's what makes the game not so fun or bad, in my opinion. So what can you do to make your game better or more fun? The first step is to identify the skills that you want to teach the player, the skills that the player has to perform in your game, whether it's going to the right and jumping in a platformer game, or managing units and time in a strategy game. Then what you can do is you can stack those skills into chains, so that the player can use his skills to learn new skills. And you want to design a deep and wide skill tree. So the depth is very important, because that creates a lot of depth in your game and allows the skill ceiling to be very high and the player to learn a lot of things and thus have a lot of fun in your game. But you also want to have the skill tree be a bit wide and broad, so that there's a lot of various different things to do in your game. And then finally, what you can do is you can make smart level designs to teach and test the player on using these skills. So if you are interested in this subject on skill atoms or fun or anything like that, I recommend you read a book by Ralph Koster called A Theory of Fun, and also check out Dan Cook's website, which is called lostgarden.com. You have any questions? Oh, sorry, yeah, okay, I'll keep it up. Yep.
So speech question is, what is non-skilled players dies on second screen of Mario, where is the first enemy? Maybe he didn't play that kind of games. There is no text, tips or arrows that helps. Is repeat level from beginning is not punishment of game gives a player?
Yeah, it's a form of punishment, but you have to repeat the level. But also you get to test your skills a bit more. You can practice a little bit more.
It's a challenge, yes. Repeatedly, maybe text tips or jump on enemy or jumps here help the player.
Well, the idea is that the most fun thing to do in a game is to learn how to play the game. And you learn by playing the game. And you don't learn how to play the game by reading a text. You learn how to play the game by playing the game. So if there's a text that says you jump on him to kill him, then the player only has to read the text, and then he does what he has just read, and then he says, okay, I did what you wanted me to do, now let's move on. And there's no reward for the player. But if
it's
the player,
Mariopedia.
Sorry?
Mariopedia, like Wikipedia.
Yeah, but if the player finds out by himself that he can jump on this enemy and then he disappears, that's like a whole reward thing for him.
Thank you.
Hello, I want to tell you a little story.
Okay.
I played a game called SpeedRunners. Okay.
Like it?
Yeah, pretty good game. First of all, I want to say thank you for this game. When I started to play this game, first of all, I solved the tutorial. It's very good. It's learned me so much skills like jumping, like picking up bonuses and other. But next step, I want, okay, I can play with another players on multiplayer.
Yeah.
But when I start playing with other players, they much skilled than me. It was so frustrating. I played 3 times a row, and it was so painful because they are much more better than me. And I don't know what to do. I close this game and think, what the hell? And second time I play a game, I practice with bots like an hour, and then I can play with players. So question is, how do you think? Is it normal when more experienced players and in a game with newbies? No, it's like. It is more painful for newbies, and I can't beat this guy, that guy without skills.
Yeah, that's it's a good question, because that's something that we're facing ourselves as well. It's really difficult to it's difficult to make a multiplayer game because you have these various skill levels, and if you pit a newbie against a very skilled player, then he's going to get crushed. And there's not all that much we can do about it. So what we did was we made the tutorial, and it's quite easy. So yeah, when you play the tutorial...
The tutorial must be longer.
Yeah, what we could maybe do, because the game is still in development, so if you have any feedback, I'm gladly appreciate it.
This is perfect.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So what we might do is have the tutorial that introduces you about the basic concepts of the game, that it's a knockout game and how everything works in that context, and then have maybe a bit more matches against bots that allow you to practice a little bit more before you take on these online opponents. That would be a good thing, yeah.
Скажите, пожалуйста, как вы относитесь к тому, что игры начинаются с уроков, которые показаны стрелочками, с надписями, что делать, на какие кнопки конкретно жать игроку? Я так понимаю, вы не очень ратуете за этот подход. Или все же есть какие-то игры, в котором он как бы необходим или без него не обойтись? И спасибо за материалы.
Is there a translation somewhere? Can anyone translate that for me?
The guy was asking is, how do you estimate the games which has tutorial with arrows, tips, and so on and so on? Is this the approach you negate, or you have to say something about that kind of approach?
Yeah, it's a. Sorry?
Your attitude towards
Yeah, to me it feels lazy, because if you like doing the level design that Super Mario did and how that teaches a player, it's a really difficult thing to do. And it's easier for the game designer to say, okay, well, we'll just put some text here and then the player will learn as well. But in the end, what you want to do is you want to make the game as fun as possible. And if learning is fun, then you want the player to learn by himself and not read a text. So that's my attitude towards that. But I have to admit that it's really difficult sometimes to try to explain things to players without using text. So I admit that in the tutorial for my game, SpeedRunners, there's also text that says you can jump here, or there's a button that says you can press A to jump. Because what can be taught through level design, some things cannot be taught through level design. For instance, in this day and age, we have these controllers that have 10 or 12 different buttons on it. And yeah, there's no way for me to explain what the functions of the different buttons are, aside from letting the player experiment on himself, by himself. Sorry.
Sorry, I also have one question.
Okay.
You said that I won't be the guy. It's a bad example because it actually does not teach anything. But from the video you shown, I saw that a player actually teaches that there are traps everywhere.
Yeah.
The apples could be deadly. The stairs could lead to the death, and so on, so on. So it's actually it's a kind of very painful manner.
Yeah, it's a painful way of teaching. Yeah.
And this may be fun too for a hardcore gamer.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's plenty of people who do enjoy a game like I Want to Be the Guy. Not myself, but I've heard of people who enjoy it. And it's true that it teaches players certain things, but everything that it teaches the player is a one-time thing. So it teaches you how to avoid this falling apple, and then it teaches you, okay, the next falling apple falls upwards, and then it teaches you the third falling apple falls downwards. But those are all like one-time things, and there's no build-up of skill. There's no, like, if I know that this apple is going to fall down, I might assume that the next one is going to fall down, but nope, it doesn't. Yep.
May I use the microphone?
Sorry? This one more? Or this the last one? Okay, this is the last question, sorry.
What about making Mario run? Run too fast to avoid some...
With the B button.
Yes, because it's no really...
Yeah, I think that running in...
I don't know
in the first Mario game is a skill that's not really necessary for a lot of the areas.
It's very necessary in, some levels.
Yeah, but in the first game, in the first levels, that's not really necessary, and there's a lot of... the game allows you a lot of time to experiment with pushing buttons and allows you to discover this skill at your own leisure and see whenever
it's only an
fits
experiment.
You. Sorry?
It's only an experiment.
Yeah.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you for your speech. And thanks for the suggestions. I see that this speech has caused a lot of ideas of how to make games better. I think you should tell them to him, and maybe there is a chance to see your idea in some of his games.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.